Hello everyone, welcome to this session. I would like to talk about the philosophy, principles and components of social casework. Do you know that the foundation for the practice of social casework is based on a conceptual framework consisting of certain values and philosophical assumptions? Yes, these values and assumptions provide us a perceptual framework to assist a person who is in need of guidance and support in problem solving. The imbibing of these values and assumptions into the professional self by the caseworker creates a personal change in attitude and outlook towards the distressed individuals and their problems. A blend of appropriate value orientation along with requisite skills, techniques and theoretical methodologies enables the caseworker to be efficient in the delivery of services. In this session, you will come to know the basic underlying philosophical assumptions of social casework, the principles of social casework, the components of social casework. Before going deep into the philosophical details of social casework, let me outline the basic assumption of social casework, which are as follows. The individual and society are interdependent and complementary. There are various operative factors that influence human behavior and attitude. Problems are psychological as well as interpersonal in nature. Social casework enables an individual to solve problems and to channelize energy and capabilities in a positive way. Social casework provides equal rights to everyone and reaches out to every needy and troubled persons. The entire gamut of social casework practice is governed by these assumptions. Let me now talk about the philosophy of social casework. The philosophical assumptions that govern the practice of social casework evolved based on the premise of human rights and social justice, which are fundamental to social casework practice. Let me now list out the various philosophical assumptions. The first one is dignity. It is a fundamental value of democracy. It is the belief in the capability of the individual to contribute to the society. Every individual has dignity and should be given due respect as a socially productive and personally gratifying individual. Second, we have self-determination. It is the belief in the inherent capability of the individual to take decisions in life and the potential ability to change and cope with problems. The third one is problem solving process. This refers to the procedural methodology employed to address the problems of a person. The caseworker does not imply his or her thoughts in working with a person, but based on the scientific inquiry applies relevant techniques and travels along with a person through a process and builds their capabilities to cope up with the demands of their social functioning. The fourth philosophy is based on needs. Casework is a response to the deficiencies arising in the life of a person. All individuals have common, specific and unmet needs in their life space that cause distress to them. Social casework aims to work on these unfulfilled needs and finds alternatives to address them. The last one is problems. The intrinsic nature of a problem is that it is dynamic, varied, unique, profuse, multidimensional and ever-growing. Let me now talk about the values in social casework. Every person has inherent worth and dignity. Every individual has the right to self-determination. Each one of us is the prime concern of the society, and everyone has potential for and the right to growth. Every individual in turn has to contribute to the society's development. The individual and the society are interdependent. Basic human needs have to be met by suitable services. These values form the core content of casework practice. The most basic value in social casework is the worth and dignity of every human being and the consideration that each individual is unique in his own way, possessing the ability to participate fully in the direction of his own life. These value orientations form the basis for social casework's direction. They are derived from the philosophical thoughts over years of human existence. These thoughts are to be differentiated from scientific theories that can be tested and proved. Let me now get into knowing about the principles of casework practice. Do you know what principles mean? Well, they are a set of commitments emerging from the philosophical assumptions and the idea of individualized help. These include maintaining confidentiality of persons who come with their problems, accepting them as they are, dealing with them in a non-condemning attitude, having a controlled emotional involvement, respecting each person's potential for self-determination and ability to identify and network with resources. Though these concepts originally developed from the values of social work, they got further shaped by the experience and expertise of case workers, with the result that they subsequently became casework principles or rules of action. The first principle is individualization, which means the ability on the part of the case worker to perceive the individual client as a unique person beyond comparison. Every individual is unique in his or her own way. Do you know the fact that even twins are not the same? The ways in which individuals react to problems are of varied nature. Therefore, the need to understand every person in his or her own ways is of prime importance when we are working with individuals. The case worker should focus on the uniqueness of the client rather than disparity. This principle argues that individuals should not be discriminated on any basis. The case worker's approach should be fresh towards each new person, respecting the worth and dignity of the client. The second one is purposeful expression of feelings, which means that the case worker recognizes the needs of the individuals to express their feelings. The emotions expressed by the clients during their interactions with the case worker may be positive, like laughing or smiling, or negative, like showing anger, crying, or being in silence. The expression of these feelings or emotions are channels through which the individual articulates his or her problems. No expressed emotion is meaningless, and therefore an understanding that there is a purpose for expressing such feelings is important. The case worker should understand the emotions of the individual client and stimulate him or her to express them freely. The third one is the principle of controlled emotional involvement, which implies the case worker's ability to maintain emotional sensitivity and balance towards the client's problem. It is very natural to being sensitive and understanding when working with clients. However, too much of involvement leads to inappropriate reactions that could cloud effective practice. The case worker should listen to the client's words and pay attention to his or her feelings. He or she should not only understand the meaning and purpose of expression of feelings and respond to the clients appropriately, but also be conscious of not being carried away by the client's emotions. The fourth one is the principle of acceptance. Acceptance is an attitude of the caseworker wherein he or she respects the dignity of the person. The caseworker deals with the client as they are, including their strengths and weaknesses, their positive and negative feelings. In casework setting, the worker approaches the client with a genuinely warm interest and accepts them as a person who is in trouble. The client should not be viewed as a problematic person, but as a person with problem. The purpose of acceptance is therapeutic in nature as it improves the dignity of the client and builds relationship between the client and the caseworker. Acceptance is expressed through warmth, courtesy, interest and compassion for the client, and it is the internal disposition of the caseworker. The fifth principle is non-judgmental attitude. Do you know that being judgmental is the worst form of humiliating a person? Non-judgmental attitude is the outlook on the part of the caseworker that does not label a person and box a person. There might be failures and weaknesses in the client. The worker has no right to judge them. When you do not judge a person, the tendency to accept the person increases, and this improves the quality of relationship between the caseworker and the client. It also excludes assigning guilt or innocence or degree of client's responsibility for the causation of the problems or needs. It also avoids making judgments both in thoughts and feelings about the attitude, standards or actions of the client. The principle of self-determination is the next one. The concept of self-determination means the practical determination of the client and the freedom to make own choice and decision. The principle of self-determination believes that every human being has a right to existence, and therefore the client must actively participate in the casework process. Also, the concept of democratic view holds that individuals are born free and therefore clients should also be free to choose their options. The caseworker has a corresponding duty to recognize the need, stimulate the client to see perspectives differently and use appropriate resources within the client and the community. The principle of confidentiality is the next one and a very important one. The literary meaning of the word confidentiality is keeping secret. Confidentiality is an ethical norm in many professional practices. In social work, it is one of the most important ethical principles. This principle underlines the worker's obligation not to disclose to anyone confidential information shared by the client. The principle of confidentiality holds that information regarding the client has to be preserved and maintained by the caseworker with due respect. The caseworker should not disclose the details about the client to anybody else who is not related to the agency. The client entrusts the caseworker with his past and present, and confidentiality is the basic right of the client. Maintaining confidentiality is necessary for effective casework practice. However, when situations demand breach of information for reasons directed towards the welfare of the client served, caseworkers can share information pertaining to the client. This is known as shared confidentiality, and this is in the best interest of the client and others. The decision to share the information for this purpose lies with the discretion of the caseworker. The next one is developing and utilizing resources. This principle is based on the premise that services are not charity but entitlements of the client. The principle explains the ability on the part of the caseworker to explore the internal resources of the client, such as the ego strengths, and the external resources such as family, friends, community, and to make it available to the client to solve their problems. The client may not be aware of the availability of these resources. The caseworker should provide information regarding them and should enable the client to utilize the resources effectively. The last one is the principle of communication. In the context of social casework, communication means interaction between the worker and the client. It is not necessary that both should agree on every issue that they discuss, but each can understand what the other person means if they really communicate with each other. Communication takes place in two ways in the process of an interaction. First, through words, that is, by relating in words or discussions. Second, through feelings and expressions in non-verbal manner. The caseworker should be capable of correlating the words and the expressions of the client to know the real situation of the client. In the beginning phase of the casework process of intervention, the clients share their difficulties. The conditions associated with the problem may not be as clearly explained by them as perceived. Hence, the caseworker needs to understand not only what the person says verbally, but also non-verbally through their body language. The worker must be a receptive person, an empathetic person, and non-blaming listener before they begin the session with a person who needs help in coping with problems. It is to be kept in mind that the worker has to work within the framework of the agency, and so no unnecessary promises should be made to the client. Now, let us move on to yet another important subtopic of this session, the components of casework. Yes, casework has very important components that emerged from the work of Helen Perlman. She incorporated them in her definition of casework and portrays them as active elements in her problem-solving model of casework practice. The definition goes on like this: a person weighed down by a problem seeks help for it from a place, that is, either a social agency or some social institution, and is offered such help by a professional social worker who uses a process which simultaneously engages and enhances the person's own problem-solving resources. They are also known as the 4 P's of social casework. Let us now see each of these components. Person. The person is an individual who has tried all methods to resolve the problem but has found no respite and finally has come to the caseworker for some direction. The person has exhausted all his resources and is determined to seek professional help. This person is called the client, and he comes with certain expectations from the caseworker or the agency. The second component is the problem. Problems include those factors that affect the person's social functioning. Problems are multifaceted and can be at various levels, such as individual problems, group problems, and community problems. Problems can also be categorized as internal psychological and external social problems. Problems also do have a chain reaction. The core problem initiates a chain reaction. For example, failure in examination can lead to poor self-confidence, which can result in loss of status, that might lead to relationship problem and inability to get a job. Sometimes being a client itself is a problem. Problems are an outcome of cause-effect process. That is, a problem can be a result of an unfavorable situation, and the result can also lead to an unfavorable situation. The client may not be aware of the core problem, and the client may experience the problem for the first time or might have experienced it earlier. The problem can be of varied nature, such as problems related to adjustment, stress, frustration, lack of resources, additional member in the family, or ill health. The next component is place. It is an agency or organization that renders professional help or service to the client. It is a place where an umbrella of care is available to the client. The agency develops programs to cater to the needs of the client or community. A social agency is an organization which expresses the will of the society. The agency has an administrative structure which fulfills the task of providing professional help. The agency should be flexible enough to reach out to the client. The community should be aware of the agency's existence and functioning. The last component is process. This is defined as the procedural path adopted to find a solution to the client's problem. Study, assessment, intervention, termination, and evaluation are the main phases of the social casework process. They are the threads of the process that will continue to be interwoven throughout the social casework process. They are the threads of the process that will continue to be interwoven throughout the casework process. Though these steps may be perceived in order, they are actually not performed in sequence. Eminent authors on social casework like Gordon Hamilton and Skidmore have pointed out that these steps are woven in and out, one process paralleling the other. Let me now summarize. We had seen about the philosophical assumptions that govern the practice of social casework, which were evolved on the premise of human rights and social justice. The values of social casework form the core content of the practice. The principles of social casework are a set of commitments that shape and refine our practice. The components of social casework are the essential elements of practice. I am sure this session was informative, and let me sign off for now and hope to meet in some other session. Thank you.